Hopefully you see the experience this type of situations often in your daycare setting. The teacher welcomes your child when they enter the classroom, and she kneels down and looks in the eyes and starts talking to him, encouraging him to tell her about what he did the previous day, and then start a conversation from there and just encouraging the child to talk. That's one of the best strategies to get your child to talk. Today, we're going to talk about how do I get my child to start reading, and when does the reading foundation actually start? Is it from infancy? Is it when they're 2s, 3s? When do I actually start teaching my child how to read? What do you have to say about that, Sarah? You're the expert.
Well, I'm not an expert, but I can tell you that your child, you just hit it. When you start talking to your child, you start them reading. Talking is the beginning of reading. When we talk about communication, we talk about, yes, reading, yes, talking, yes, listening or hearing. And all of that fits together. It's not just reading, it's talking. So how does literacy begin? It begins when the baby's still in the womb. You know, they actually created this little activity called a pregaphone that a mom could hook up and listen, and then she could put it right here on her belly, and when the baby was still in the womb, she could talk to her baby. She could sing to her baby. She could make sure her baby was already hearing sounds, because babies have brain connections that start connecting while they're still in utero. So we know that you don't have to wait even for them to be born. You can start singing to them now.
Wow. So like building the foundation for reading begins when before the child is born.
Yes.
And then when they're born, through how you speak to a child, that is how they start speaking and learning and communicating.
And you know this all too well because you were raised in the Dominican Republic and you speak a different language. And new sounds in the English language are harder for you to say because you didn't hear them when you were an infant. Okay. Now, as you grow older, you've learned them, have mastered all of that. But babies absolutely only can see and say what they can hear. So they hear those connections being made, and then they start speaking those connections. So all the roots of speaking happen before kids can even form words because they're hearing them, brain connections are being made, and then those pathways are created. And when they start talking, those connections get stronger and stronger. What's the first thing all babies recognize? Their own name. They recognize their own name. So they learn very quickly when they hear someone that go, Marnie, Marnie. And if it's said with joy and if Marnie is sung to them, all of that happens. And the baby then begins to think, that is me they're talking about. They smile, they get excited. They know. And what do they say first? One of their first words, me. Yeah. They say that because they begin to understand how they fit. So the root of language and reading is in infancy. So hard to believe.
That's amazing. And before that, it's about attachment, that deep and emotional connection that the kid builds with the caregiver, especially with the mother and other caregivers in the family. So what is that like in the infant room, for example, where you have so many babies? We always look at that. A good trait of a good caregiver in the infant room is a room that is filled with music, songs, reading, and verbalization of what they're doing. Because a lot of times, like when you see a caregiver that is not actually talking of what they're doing, like I'm changing your diaper, or I am doing this and going over, and this is your leg. And a lot of caregivers that are not educated in the importance of this might not understand what is the role they're actually playing when they talk over what they're doing in an infant. They're strengthening those like neural connections early on to start building that vocabulary.
And just think about how attachment happens. It usually happens with babies looking at their mom or their dad or their caregiver's face. And so they begin very early to recognize different feelings. So they recognize what your face looks like. They recognize what it looks like when you're happy. They recognize what it looks like when you're disturbed. They recognize what it looks like when you're anxious. I can remember one time when my son was about 3, I got a real disturbing phone call, and I went into the next room after the call, and my little boy said, "Mommy, what happened to your face?" And I thought, wow, he can read my face. He was already starting to read by looking at facial expressions. Think about how powerful that is, that babies can read their caregivers' faces, and that turns into reading words, and it turns into literacy. And it turns into when my son was 2 and got in the bathtub with a book.
Oh my, well, I have to hear about that.
Because I knew then that he was going to be a reader, because he had seen me read in the bathtub. Yeah. And I had these special bath books. They make them. They're plastic, and you can put them in the tub. I know that. Yeah.
Oh, we need the bathtub first. But, there are a lot of studies that talk about the difference between babies that are talked to and the correlation to having a higher IQ.
Yes, so, and not just higher IQ. The Hart and Risley study that was done with children, and they actually went into the homes of these infants, 3 months old all the way to 3 years old, and they were watching all the interactions, and they were marking what they saw and when they saw it, and what they found, which is fascinating, is that young children who had moms who talked to them a lot had more language than people who had moms who didn't talk to them. So they were talked to, and they talked earlier. They talked more often. They had more discrete words. Oh, wow. They heard more words, so they said more words. You want to build vocabulary? Yeah. Don't just go over the vocabulary list. Talk to your child.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, so let's get started with some strategies and practical tips. So I would say maybe songs, having a repertoire of songs. Oh, yes. That it makes it so much easier for kids to learn new words, and repeating the same songs over and over and over again, even if you're tired of them, would actually serve a purpose.
They'll say, sing it again, sing it again.
Yeah, right? it helps them develop the listening skills, but it's also building their vocabulary. So also playing and, like, for example, giving directions to your child helps them big that, making your own silly songs.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And just sing everything. In fact, sing it when you could say it. Sing it when you can say it, because that sing song, they call it parentese. That's what they call the word in literacy, that parents, especially of infants, have a way of talking that's called parentese, and they hear it and you want it. Yeah. And then as you get older, you will change that into a little bit different vocabulary, but talk and talk often, and talk about things that you want them to hear, because they hear you.
Well, I mean, a lot of people, adults, change their tone of voice when they see a baby. I don't know, for some reason, like, oh my God, you're so cute. And all your pitch holds like super high. I mean, it's the reality. They are adorable. But I think keeping that same tone of voice, very positive, because as you said, they can sense our emotions by the tone of our voice and our gestures. Right.
And our faces, and especially tone of voice. I know just the other day, one of my grandchildren said, "Mimi, why are you mad?" And I thought, well, I'm not mad. But I had said something that sounded mad, and they heard it. And I thought, I've got to change the way I say things. I've got to be careful, because if you change that, they hear it. So, I didn't think I was mad, but apparently my mad was coming through.
Yeah, without realizing. So that's a whole new episode. Like,
okay,
like
all
the
right.
tone of voice and talking to children. But another strategy, and you're expert on this one, is like the reading books from infants and having those routines for children. So I bet you have a lot of stories from reading.
Of course, you know that there's a great favorite book all kids have called Brown Bear, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. In fact, I just taught that to a class the other day, but I took it a step further by taking their own little book, and they wrote books like hamburger, what do you see? I see a hot dog looking at me. So they made their own stories up. And that's the kind of thing you're going to see as you make sure you know that reading and all of learning is a patterning. The brain is a pattern-seeking device. It's always looking for patterns. And so when you give them the pattern of singing a song and repetition, all the things that we do, we always play a game with the kids, and it's with their name, because that's their most important name, is their own word. And it's Marnie, bo Barney, fee, fi, bo Barney, Marnie. And then my kids will say it back to me. You know, they'll make up, and they play games with words, and they have jingles that they make up. That's when you know that the language of learning starts right there.
So when it's too early to start reading to your child?
You can't. I mean, I remember the pregaphone.
Yeah.
They're in the, you start not just reading, but also telling stories. Tell them stories about when you were a little girl. They like to hear those stories. Tell them stories, because anything you can do that involves that kind of a concept teaches them how a story fits together. And that's what books are. They're stories.
Well, and I remember my mother is very creative with storytelling, and she always had a hook at the end of the story that kept my kids like, wanting to learn more about it the next time. So it's like a soap opera that you cannot stop binge watching. But I think that's a great strategy that she taught them, and until this day they remember that.
Absolutely. And they like the stories you tell better than stories that even are in a book. I was in a classroom one time when I was a kindergarten supervisor, and I said to the kids, "What's your favorite books?" And they brought me all these books. They brought a book that was like the primer. They bought a book that was a library book, and they bought a book they had made. And they said, "Well, this one's our favorite, the one they had made. But our teacher and other people will read this one first." So they love the things they create.
Yes,
so help them with their stories.
Absolutely. Making a class book, making a book about our family and what people say. That's always a great strategy. And the correlation between movement and words is very important. I mean, you want to talk about that, how to get things moving?
Well, we know that it's not that the brain follows, it's not that the body follows the brain follows the body. So the body moves first. So we know that the body has to be moving. Everybody talks about, can you get your kids to sit still? No, not if they're learning. You want them moving. They're going to move. And especially if they're young, that's the height of learning. You can't stop learning, and you can't stop moving. So make moving work for you.
Absolutely.
Move with them. It's good for us. It keeps us young. Keep moving.
I love it. Well, and so once they're a little older, maybe like 3, other strategies include, which you've mentioned, and you're famous for this, label everything in your house.
Oh, yeah. Label it. It may look weird to you, but it's good for children.
Yeah, like door and refrigerator and all those fancy words.
That's a great word, refrigerator. When you put that up, everybody learns it immediately because it has such a look to it. Yeah. And that's what a sight word is. They want to be able to know by sight that these are some words.
Well, I still struggle with a couple of words. My husband makes fun of me sometimes that I cannot pronounce it, but it's because of that. It's not my first language. But so label everything. Also limit screen time. A lot of kids are spending too much time in front of their devices. They go to a restaurant and you see the parents just like give their phone away and they're quiet. But are they really learning? How can you engage a child in real conversations during meal times?
Well, first of all, engage them. Make sure they are a part of it. And most people that you see, they'll get in their car and they'll hand their screen back because it keeps the child quiet or whatever it is. And there's times, hey, we've all been there. We've all been there, and we know sometimes it's okay. Just don't make that your way of operandi, because if you make that the way you operate all the time, then your child's missing something. You want them involved. And they have so much to offer. So listen, learn. If you're driving in the car, do like my son said, turn off the radio and just talk. So you can talk, you can listen, you can play games, you can sing, you can make up songs. If you just change what you're talking about and sing it, as a classroom teacher, every child stops and watches. If you're at the dinner table and you decide you want to sing something, maybe the neighbors next door at the restaurant think you're nuts, but who cares? You got the attention.
Absolutely. And being an intentional parent, start with that knowledge of understanding that you only have like a small time frame. I mean, it was just like yesterday that we were raising little kids, right? And it feels that way. And all of a sudden they grow up. So it's a very limited time frame that might look like a long time, but it's just very few years. And especially the early years, that window of opportunity of engaging in those conversations and really having that, strengthening that connection and having those prompt questions at the back. Because a lot of kids don't like to talk, right? Like
I don't have any of those.
But I did. I mean, I have both of them talk, but my daughter talk a lot more than my son, right?
That's not unusual.
Yeah. So you have to like balance that and have those prompt questions that not only one talks, but that everybody's engaged in the conversation.
It helps to be able to say something like, hey, what fun things did you do at school today? Or tell me about something that happened that was not so pleasant today. Give them a little more to work from, because just pulling it out of the air is not always easy.
Connecting with emotions, right? What make you happy?
Yes.
What make you sad? That's a great strategy and conversation starter. That's great. So, and then going to the library together. That's something that you really enjoyed. You still enjoy it.
Oh,
right?
I do. I pick up my grandchildren, library, Mimi, library, because that's where they first of all, we have a fabulous library in the city of Winter Park, and it's just a fun place because it has activities, it has games. They can go around and it's just fun. Yeah. And I like to be there because I can pick up different books and they can take them home. I have to limit. You can't have more than 10.
Of course.
Because otherwise I can't even carry them out the door. They just love books.
Wow. So in conclusion, how do you get your child to read? Begins in the infancy with amazing everyday talking points to your child and establishing that emotional connection and engaging in rich conversations with big words so that they could build their vocabulary and strengthen their listening skills. It's a beautiful journey that reminds us that no effort is too small, that we have to be intentional about the years where we have them.
They hear everything. The other day, my granddaughter said, "Oh, Mimi, look, I just hurt my finger. Is it terminal?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "Terminal." What means terminal? And I thought, what means it? And so she's heard a word. She's going to try using it.
Yeah.
This is literacy. Literacy starts with every opportunity we have to read to our children, to hear our children, to listen to our children, and talk to our children.
So in conclusion.
Well, literacy happens from the very beginning, even before they're born. And that is the beginning of your school success is really dependent a large degree on literacy and reading. So if you can make reading easy for children, it makes school easy. And I think it makes life easy.
Absolutely. So today it was all about getting your child to read. And that starts in infancy with the words, the interactions. And if you like that show and this episode, please subscribe and like our YouTube channel. And we'll see you in another episode of Raising Innovators.